In the world of royalty, every gesture speaks volumes, every accessory tells a story, and every choice sends a message that echoes through palace halls and newspaper headlines alike. When Queen Camilla stepped into the grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace that evening, adorned with a particular piece of jewelry that hadn't been seen in public for months, she unknowingly set in motion a series of events that would test family bonds, challenge traditions, and reveal the complex dynamics that exist behind the golden gates of the monarchy. What began as a simple fashion choice would become a statement so bold, so loaded with meaning, that even King Charles himself would pause mid-conversation, his eyes drawn immediately to the familiar sapphires and diamonds that once graced another's neck. This is the story of how one necklace became the center of a royal storm that no one saw coming. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Clarence House as Camilla stood before her dressing room mirror, contemplating the day ahead. The charity gala that evening would mark her first major public appearance since returning from the royal tour of Australia, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Her personal dresser, Margaret, had laid out several jewelry options on the velvet-lined tray, each piece carefully selected to complement the deep blue gown that hung nearby. As Camilla's fingers traced over the various necklaces, her eyes stopped at a particular piece that seemed to call to her. The sapphire and diamond necklace sparkled in the morning light, its intricate design telling a story of craftsmanship and royal heritage. She had discovered it months ago while organizing the royal jewelry collection, tucked away in a section that hadn't been accessed in quite some time. The piece was exquisite, clearly of royal quality, but somehow it had been overlooked in recent years. Margaret noticed her fixation on the necklace and approached cautiously. The elderly dresser had served the royal family for over 3 decades, and she possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every piece in the collection. However, this particular necklace seemed to exist in a gray area of protocol that even she found challenging to navigate. It wasn't technically restricted, yet its history was complicated. "That's a beautiful choice, Your Majesty," Margaret said, her voice carrying a subtle note of uncertainty. "Though perhaps we should verify its availability with the palace jewelry coordinator." Camilla lifted the necklace, feeling its weight in her hands. The sapphires caught the light beautifully, and she could already envision how stunning it would look against her evening gown. There was something about this piece that felt right, as if it had been waiting for the perfect moment to shine again. The design was timeless, elegant without being ostentatious, and it would certainly make the right impression at tonight's gala. "I think it's perfect for this evening," Camilla replied, her decision firm. "Please have it cleaned and prepared." Meanwhile, across London at Kensington Palace, Catherine was dealing with her own preparations for the evening. The charity gala was one she particularly cared about, as it supported causes close to her heart involving children's mental health. She had been looking forward to this event for weeks, especially since it would give her an opportunity to wear a dress she had been saving for a special occasion. As she discussed the evening's details with her private secretary, Catherine mentioned wanting to wear a specific necklace that held sentimental value. It was a piece she hadn't worn in several months due to various circumstances, but she felt tonight would be the perfect time to bring it out again. However, when her request was passed along to the appropriate channels, a curious situation arose. The palace jewelry coordinator, Mrs. Harrison, found herself in an unusual predicament. The same necklace was apparently being requested by 2 different members of the royal family for the same evening. Such situations were rare, but not unheard of, though they required delicate handling. The protocol in these cases was typically to defer to seniority or to suggest alternative pieces, but this particular situation was more complex than usual. Mrs. Harrison reviewed her records carefully, trying to understand how this overlap had occurred. The necklace in question had been part of the royal collection for decades, and while it had been associated with various family members over the years, its current status was somewhat ambiguous. Recent changes in the family structure and jewelry allocation had created some gray areas that were still being sorted out. After much deliberation, Mrs. Harrison decided to handle the situation through the proper channels. She would need to contact both households and diplomatically resolve the conflict. However, the timing was tight, and the evening was rapidly approaching. Sometimes in royal households, messages could be delayed or misinterpreted, especially when dealing with multiple residences and busy schedules. Charles was in his study at Clarence House, reviewing his speech for the evening's gala when his private secretary knocked on the door. The king had been particularly invested in this charity event, as it aligned with his long-standing commitment to various social causes. He wanted the evening to go smoothly and had been pleased to hear that both Camilla and Catherine would be in attendance, showing family unity in support of the cause. "Your Majesty," the secretary began, "there seems to be a small administrative matter regarding this evening's preparations that may require your attention." Charles looked up from his papers, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "What sort of matter?" "It appears there may be some confusion in the jewelry coordination department. Nothing that can't be resolved, but Mrs. Harrison thought you should be aware before this evening." Charles nodded, trusting that his staff would handle whatever minor bureaucratic issue had arisen. The royal household was well practiced in managing such details, and he had confidence in their ability to sort out any administrative confusion. His mind was already returning to his speech when the secretary left, assuming the matter would be resolved through the proper channels. As the afternoon progressed, both households continued their preparations. Camilla was having her hairstyle while the chosen necklace was being given a final cleaning and inspection. The piece truly was magnificent, and everyone who saw it commented on its beauty and elegance. The palace jeweler who was cleaning it noted its exceptional quality and craftsmanship, mentioning to colleagues how wonderful it was to see such pieces being worn again after being stored away. Catherine, meanwhile, was under the impression that her jewelry request was being processed as usual. She had been working with a new member of her staff who was still learning the intricacies of royal protocol, and some communications may not have been as clear as they should have been. The assumption was that everything was proceeding normally for the evening's preparations. As evening approached, the various households began their final preparations. Cars were arranged, schedules were confirmed, and security details were briefed. The charity gala was expected to be a significant event, with substantial media coverage and numerous high-profile attendees. Both Charles and Camilla, as well as Catherine and William, were expected to make strong impressions representing the royal family. The venue for the evening was the Grand Ballroom at Buckingham Palace, a setting that never failed to impress guests and create a sense of occasion. The room had been decorated beautifully for the charity gala, with elegant flower arrangements and carefully positioned lighting that would complement the formal attire of the attendees. The media had been briefed and positioned for the arrival photos, and royal correspondents were already speculating about which family members would wear what. As Camilla put the finishing touches on her preparation, she felt confident about her appearance. The necklace complemented her gown perfectly, and she was pleased with how the entire ensemble had come together. Margaret had done excellent work coordinating all the elements, and Camilla felt ready to represent the crown with dignity and style. The car journey to Buckingham Palace was peaceful, with Charles and Camilla discussing the evening ahead and the importance of the charity they were supporting. Charles complimented Camilla on her appearance, noting how elegantly she had put together her outfit for the evening. He was pleased to see her wearing pieces from the royal collection, as it demonstrated continuity and respect for royal traditions. At the same time, Catherine was making her final preparations at Kensington Palace. She had chosen a stunning gown that she felt confident would photograph well and represent her appropriately for the occasion. However, there had been some last-minute confusion about her jewelry that her staff was still trying to resolve. Alternative pieces had been suggested, and while Catherine was slightly disappointed not to wear her first choice, she understood that such adjustments were sometimes necessary in royal life. The first guests were beginning to arrive at Buckingham Palace as the royal family prepared to make their entrance. The atmosphere was one of anticipation and elegance, with everyone looking forward to an evening dedicated to supporting important charitable causes. The palace staff had ensured that every detail was perfect, from the catering to the entertainment to the ceremonial aspects of the evening. As Charles and Camilla's car pulled up to the palace entrance, the media cameras began clicking rapidly. The king and queen consort stepped out gracefully, both looking resplendent in their formal attire. The photographers immediately began capturing images, and several royal correspondents noted Camilla's particularly striking jewelry choice for their later reports. Inside the palace, the receiving line was being prepared, and final arrangements were being made for the royal family's entrance into the ballroom. The evening's program had been carefully choreographed to ensure maximum impact for the charity while maintaining appropriate royal protocol. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as planned. However, in the complex world of royal households, where tradition meets modernity and where every detail carries potential significance, the stage was unknowingly being set for an evening that would be remembered for more than just its charitable achievements. Sometimes the most significant moments arise from the smallest details, and tonight, one particular piece of jewelry was about to become the center of unexpected attention. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace buzzed with elegant conversation as guests mingled before the formal program began. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled crowd, which included prominent philanthropists, celebrities, government officials, and members of high society. Everyone had dressed in their finest attire for the occasion, but all eyes would soon turn to the royal family as they made their official entrance. Charles and Camilla stood in the antechamber adjacent to the ballroom, making final preparations for their entrance. The king reviewed his mental notes about the key guests he would need to greet personally, while Camilla checked her appearance one last time in the ornate mirror. The sapphire and diamond necklace caught the light beautifully, creating small rainbows that danced across the silk of her gown. "You look absolutely radiant this evening," Charles told his wife, his genuine admiration evident in his voice. He had always appreciated Camilla's sense of style and her ability to choose pieces that enhanced rather than overwhelmed her natural elegance. Tonight was no exception, and he felt proud to have her by his side for such an important charitable event. The palace's master of ceremonies appeared to signal that it was time for their entrance. As the doors to the ballroom opened and the royal couple was announced, the room fell into respectful silence before breaking into warm applause. Charles and Camilla stepped forward together, their practiced grace evident as they began the formal process of greeting guests and moving through the crowd. Almost immediately, several guests complimented Camilla on her stunning jewelry choice. Lady Pemberton, a longtime supporter of the charity, was particularly effusive in her praise. "Your Majesty, that necklace is absolutely exquisite," she gushed. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. It must have such a wonderful history." Camilla smiled graciously, accepting the compliments with the appropriate mixture of appreciation and modesty. She was pleased that her choice was being so well received, and she felt confident that she was representing the crown appropriately. The necklace did indeed feel special, and she was happy to be giving it the public attention it deserved after being stored away for so long. As they continued through the room, Charles couldn't help but notice the number of people who were commenting on Camilla's necklace. While he was generally familiar with the major pieces in the royal collection, the specific details of every item weren't always at the forefront of his mind. He trusted Camilla's judgment in such matters and was pleased that her choice was generating such positive attention for the evening. Meanwhile, Catherine and William had arrived at the palace and were making their way through the formal entry procedures. Catherine looked elegant in her chosen gown, though she was still slightly disappointed about the jewelry confusion that had prevented her from wearing her preferred necklace. The alternative pieces suggested by her staff were beautiful, but she had been looking forward to wearing the specific necklace that had apparently become unavailable at the last minute. "You look beautiful regardless," William had assured her during their car ride to the palace. He could sense her slight frustration about the jewelry situation, but he also knew that Catherine would handle the evening with perfect grace, as she always did. The cause they were supporting was too important to let minor administrative issues overshadow the main purpose of the evening. As Catherine and William entered the ballroom, they were greeted with the same warm reception that had welcomed Charles and Camilla. The assembled guests were clearly honored to have multiple members of the royal family in attendance, and the atmosphere was one of excitement and anticipation for the evening's program. Catherine began her own circuit of the room, engaging in conversations with various guests and learning more about their involvement with the charity. She had a natural ability to connect with people and make them feel heard and valued. Several guests shared personal stories about how the charity had impacted their lives or the lives of their family members, reminding everyone of the real purpose behind the evening's elegant facade. It was during one of these conversations that Catherine first caught sight of Camilla across the room. Even from a distance, something about Camilla's appearance caught her attention. There was something familiar about the jewelry she was wearing, though Catherine couldn't immediately place what it was. The ballroom was crowded and well-lit, but the specific details weren't clear from where Catherine was standing. As the evening progressed, both couples continued to work the rooms separately, each engaging with different groups of guests. The charity's organizers were thrilled with the turnout and the level of engagement from all the royal family members present. Media representatives who were covering the event noted the strong showing of royal support and began preparing their reports about the successful gathering. Charles found himself in conversation with the charity's director, discussing the impact of their programs and future plans for expansion. He was genuinely interested in the work being done and asked detailed questions about how the royal family support could be most effectively utilized. This kind of substantive engagement with charitable causes had always been important to him, and he wanted to ensure that their presence at the event translated into meaningful support for the organization. During a brief pause in his conversations, Charles began scanning the room to check on the other family members and gauge how the evening was proceeding overall. His eyes found Camilla first, who was engaged in animated conversation with a group of donors. She looked happy and confident, clearly enjoying herself and representing the family well. As his gaze moved across the room to locate William and Catherine, Charles's attention was drawn back to Camilla. Something about her appearance made him look more carefully, and suddenly he found himself focusing specifically on the necklace she was wearing. The sapphires and diamonds were certainly beautiful, but as he observed the piece more closely, a sense of recognition began to dawn on him. The specific pattern of the sapphires, the particular way the diamonds were set around them, the overall design of the piece. These details were triggering memories that Charles hadn't accessed in some time. He found himself studying the necklace more intently, trying to place exactly where he'd seen it before and in what context. As these thoughts were processing in his mind, Charles noticed that Catherine was also looking in Camilla's direction. Even from across the room, he could see that Catherine's expression had changed. There was something in her posture and the way she was holding herself that suggested she had also noticed something significant about Camilla's jewelry choice. The recognition hit Charles with sudden clarity. The necklace that Camilla was wearing wasn't just any piece from the royal collection. It was a necklace that had been specifically associated with Catherine for several years. Charles remembered seeing her wear it at numerous official events, and it had become somewhat of a signature piece for her during certain periods. The realization brought with it a complex mix of emotions and concerns about how this situation had come to pass. Charles tried to recall the specific protocols around jewelry allocation and whether there might have been some legitimate reason for the change. The royal collection was vast and complex, and pieces were sometimes reassigned or redistributed for various reasons. However, he couldn't immediately think of any recent decisions that would have resulted in this particular transfer. As he continued to process this realization, Charles became aware that other guests in the room were also beginning to notice the situation. Some of the more observant attendees, particularly those who regularly followed royal fashion choices, were starting to whisper among themselves. Royal correspondents in attendance were taking careful note of details they might include in their coverage of the event. The king found himself in a delicate position. He needed to address the situation somehow, but he also needed to avoid creating a scene or drawing unwanted attention to what was clearly a sensitive matter. The evening was supposed to be about supporting the charity, and he didn't want personal or administrative issues to overshadow that important purpose. Catherine, meanwhile, had definitely recognized the necklace and was struggling to maintain her composure while continuing her conversations with guests. She prided herself on her professionalism and her ability to handle unexpected situations with grace, but this particular scenario was testing those skills. The necklace held personal significance for her, and seeing it worn by someone else without explanation was emotionally challenging. William, ever attentive to his wife's emotional state, noticed that something had changed in Catherine's demeanor. He followed her gaze across the room and quickly understood the source of her distress. His own reaction was one of concern, both for Catherine's feelings and for the potential implications of the situation. Like Charles, he found himself wondering how this jewelry mix-up had occurred and what the appropriate response should be. The evening's formal program was scheduled to begin soon, which would require all family members to take their designated seats at the head table. The seating arrangement would place Charles and Camilla directly across from William and Catherine, making the necklace even more prominently visible and potentially creating an uncomfortable dynamic for the remainder of the evening. As guests began to move toward their tables in preparation for the formal dinner and speeches, Charles made a quick decision. He needed to have a brief word with Camilla before they took their seats, both to understand how the jewelry situation had occurred and to determine the best way to handle it moving forward. The conversation would need to be discreet and handled with sensitivity to avoid creating additional complications. Excusing himself from his current conversation, Charles made his way across the ballroom toward Camilla. She was just finishing a discussion with several major donors when she saw him approaching. Her smile was warm and welcoming, clearly pleased with how the evening was proceeding and unaware of the growing tension surrounding her jewelry choice. "The evening seems to be going wonderfully," Camilla said as Charles reached her side. "Everyone has been so complimentary about the cause and so generous in their support." Charles nodded, acknowledging the success of the event while preparing to address the more delicate matter at hand. He needed to find a way to broach the subject of the necklace without causing embarrassment or creating a scene in the middle of the crowded ballroom. The timing was challenging, but the situation needed to be addressed before it potentially escalated further. "Camilla," Charles began carefully, his voice low enough to avoid being overheard by nearby guests. "I need to have a quick word with you about something rather delicate." Camilla's expression shifted slightly, sensing the seriousness in her husband's tone. She nodded, allowing him to guide her toward a slightly more private corner of the ballroom where they could speak without attracting attention. The conversation needed to happen quickly, as the evening's formal program was about to commence. "That necklace you're wearing this evening," Charles continued, choosing his words carefully. "I believe there may have been some confusion in the jewelry coordination. It appears that Catherine had also requested to wear that particular piece tonight." The color drained slightly from Camilla's face as the implications of Charles's words sank in. She had trusted her staff to handle all the appropriate protocols, and the possibility that there had been a significant oversight was deeply troubling. "Charles, I had no idea," she whispered, her voice filled with genuine distress. "Margaret assured me that all proper procedures had been followed." Charles could see the genuine shock and concern in his wife's expression, and it was clear that the situation was the result of administrative confusion rather than any intentional slight. However, the fact remained that they were now in a very public setting with a potentially explosive situation that could easily be misinterpreted by guests, media, and, most importantly, by Catherine herself. "I understand it wasn't intentional," Charles replied, his tone reassuring but urgent. "The question now is how we handle this without creating a scene or drawing unwanted attention to the matter." Across the ballroom, Catherine was struggling to maintain her composure as she continued to engage with guests. The sight of her necklace being worn by Camilla was not just disappointing. It felt deeply personal. That particular piece had been worn during some of her most important royal engagements, including several events that held special meaning for her. To see it on someone else, particularly without any prior discussion or explanation, was emotionally jarring. William stayed close to his wife's side, offering subtle support while trying to assess the best way to navigate the situation. He could see that Catherine was using every ounce of her professional training to maintain her public facade, but he also knew her well enough to understand the depth of her distress. The situation was particularly challenging because there was no immediate way to address it without potentially creating an even more awkward scene. "I think we should simply continue with the evening as planned," William whispered to Catherine during a brief moment between conversations. "We can sort out the details privately afterward." Catherine nodded, appreciating her husband's steady presence and practical advice. She knew he was right about maintaining professionalism for the remainder of the event, but the emotional challenge of the situation remained significant. Every time she caught sight of the necklace, she felt a fresh wave of hurt and confusion. Meanwhile, Charles and Camilla were still discussing their options in hushed tones. The master of ceremonies was beginning to signal that guests should take their seats for the formal dinner portion of the evening, which meant their conversation time was running out. Would it be possible to change the jewelry somehow? Charles asked, though even as he spoke the words, he realized the impracticality of the suggestion. They were in the middle of a formal event, with hundreds of guests and media present. Any sudden change in Camilla's appearance would likely be noticed and could create even more speculation. "I don't think that would be wise," Camilla replied, reaching the same conclusion. "It would probably draw more attention than leaving things as they are." As they spoke, several guests approached to compliment Camilla on her appearance, particularly praising the necklace. Each compliment felt increasingly uncomfortable given the circumstances, but both Charles and Camilla maintained their gracious demeanor while internally grappling with the situation. Lady Morrison, a prominent socialite and regular attendee at royal events, was particularly effusive in her praise. "Your Majesty, I must say that necklace is absolutely stunning. I remember admiring it at several events over the years. It's wonderful to see such beautiful pieces from the collection being showcased." The comment hung in the air with uncomfortable weight, as it implicitly acknowledged that the necklace had been seen at other royal events, worn by other family members. Charles and Camilla exchanged a glance, both understanding that the situation was becoming increasingly delicate as more people became aware of the jewelry's history. The call to take seats for dinner could no longer be delayed. Charles offered his arm to Camilla, and they began making their way to the head table where William and Catherine were already seated. The seating arrangement, which had been planned weeks in advance, now felt like a cruel twist of fate as it would place the two couples directly across from each other for the entire formal dinner. As Charles and Camilla approached the table, Catherine looked up and made direct eye contact with Camilla for the first time that evening. The moment was brief, but charged with unspoken tension. Catherine's professional training kicked in, and she offered a polite smile, but both women understood the complexity of the moment. "Good evening, Catherine, William," Camilla said as they reached the table, her voice carrying perhaps a note of extra warmth as if to compensate for the uncomfortable situation. "You both look wonderful tonight." "Thank you," Catherine replied, her voice perfectly controlled but lacking its usual warmth. "You look lovely as well." The exchange was polite and appropriate on the surface, but anyone paying close attention might have detected the subtle undercurrents of tension. William and Charles both worked to fill any conversational gaps while the final guests took their seats and the evening's program officially began. The charity's director took the podium to welcome the guests and begin the formal presentations about the organization's work. The speeches provided a welcome distraction from the personal dynamics playing out at the head table, allowing all four family members to focus their attention on the important cause they were there to support. However, throughout the dinner service and presentations, the necklace remained a persistent source of tension. Every time the light caught the sapphires, every time a camera flash illuminated the head table, every time another guest complimented Camilla's appearance, the underlying issue remained unresolved and increasingly uncomfortable. Charles found himself dividing his attention between listening to the speeches and observing the dynamics between Camilla and Catherine. Both women were handling the situation with remarkable professionalism, but he could sense the strain it was causing. He began to formulate plans for how to address the matter privately after the evening concluded. During one of the speakers' presentations, a photographer moved closer to capture images of the royal family's engagement with the program. The resulting photographs would likely appear in newspapers and magazines, permanently documenting this evening and, inadvertently, the jewelry controversy. Charles realized that the situation would likely extend beyond this evening and into the realm of public and media speculation. Camilla, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly conscious of every movement and gesture. What had begun as a confident fashion choice was now feeling like a burden. She found herself unconsciously touching the necklace, a nervous habit that only served to draw more attention to the very thing she now wished she could make disappear. The irony was not lost on anyone at the table that they were attending an event dedicated to supporting others while dealing with their own family tension. The charity's work focused on bringing people together and supporting those in need, yet here they were struggling with their own interpersonal challenges. As the formal presentations concluded and the evening began to wind down, all four family members knew that the real conversations would need to happen once they left the public eye. The event had been a success from the charity's perspective, with significant funds raised and important awareness generated. However, for the royal family, the evening had created new challenges that would need to be carefully addressed. William leaned over to Catherine during a break in the program. "You've handled this beautifully," he whispered, his pride in her professionalism evident. "We'll sort everything out properly later." Catherine nodded, grateful for his support and encouragement. She knew that the evening was nearly over and that she had successfully maintained her composure throughout a genuinely difficult situation. The professional skills she had developed over years of royal duties had served her well, but she was looking forward to the privacy where she could process her feelings more honestly. Charles was already planning the conversations that would need to take place. The jewelry coordination systems would need to be reviewed and improved to prevent similar situations in the future. More immediately, he needed to have honest discussions with both Camilla and Catherine to understand their perspectives and work toward a resolution that respected everyone's feelings. As the guests began to move from the formal dinner setting back to the reception area for the evening's conclusion, the four family members faced the challenge of continuing to present a united front while privately grappling with the tensions that had emerged. The real work of addressing the situation would begin once they left Buckingham Palace and could speak openly about what had transpired. The evening's success in supporting the charity was undeniable, but the personal cost of the jewelry confusion had created ripples that would need to be carefully managed in the days to come. The reception following dinner provided a temporary reprieve from the intensity of the seated dinner, allowing the royal family members to circulate separately and engage with different groups of guests. However, the underlying tension remained palpable, at least to those who knew what to look for. Catherine used this time to have meaningful conversations with several charity beneficiaries, finding genuine solace in hearing their stories and understanding the impact of the organization's work. These interactions reminded her of why she had been so committed to attending the event in the first place, and they helped her maintain perspective on what truly mattered beyond the personal disappointments of the evening. One young woman, Sarah, shared how the charity's mental health programs had helped her through a particularly difficult period in her life. "Your Royal Highness," she said earnestly, "knowing that people like you care about these issues makes such a difference. It gives people like me hope." Catherine was deeply moved by Sarah's words and found herself temporarily forgetting about the necklace situation as she focused on this meaningful exchange. These were the moments that made all the protocols and formalities worthwhile and They reminded her of the bigger picture beyond any administrative confusion or personal slights. Meanwhile, Camilla was engaged in her own conversations, but she couldn't fully escape the growing awareness of the situation she had inadvertently created. Several more guests had complimented the necklace throughout the evening, and with each comment, she became more conscious of its significance and the potential hurt her wearing it might have caused. During a conversation with Mrs. Wellington, a longtime royal watcher and donor, the older woman made an observation that struck particularly close to home. "That necklace brings back such lovely memories, Your Majesty. I remember when Princess Catherine wore it to the Children's Hospital Gala last year. She looked absolutely radiant that evening." The comment was innocent and well-meaning, but it served as a stark reminder of the necklace's recent history and its association with Catherine. Camilla managed to smile graciously and thank Mrs. Wellington for the compliment, but internally, she felt another wave of discomfort about the situation. Charles spent much of the reception observing the dynamics and planning his approach for the conversations that would need to happen after the event. He could see that both Camilla and Catherine were handling themselves professionally, but he also recognized that the situation needed to be addressed promptly and sensitively to prevent any lasting damage to family relationships. During a brief moment when he found himself standing near William, Charles decided to acknowledge the situation directly. "I want you to know that I'm aware of the complications this evening," he said quietly. "We'll sort this out properly once we're away from the public eye." William appreciated his father's awareness and directness. "Catherine has been remarkably gracious about the whole thing," he replied. "But I know she's hurt by the confusion." "Of course she is," Charles acknowledged. "And rightfully so. This kind of oversight shouldn't have happened." As the evening drew to a close, the royal family members began the formal process of saying goodbye to the key organizers and thanking them for their excellent work. The charity's director was effusive in her gratitude for the royal support, noting that the presence of multiple family members had significantly enhanced the event's success and media coverage. "Your Majesties, your Royal Highnesses," she said warmly, "tonight has exceeded our expectations in every way. The funds raised will make such a difference to the families we serve, and having your support means everything to our organization." The genuine appreciation from the charity's leadership served as a reminder to all four family members that, despite the personal tensions, the evening had achieved its primary purpose. The work of supporting important causes had to continue regardless of administrative mishaps or interpersonal challenges. As they prepared to leave Buckingham Palace, Charles made a quick decision about how to handle the immediate aftermath. Rather than allowing everyone to return to their separate residences and potentially stew over the evening's events, he felt it would be better to address the situation directly and promptly. "Camilla, William, Catherine," he said as they gathered in a private anteroom away from the remaining guests and staff, "I think we should have a brief conversation about this evening before we all head home. Would you be amenable to continuing our discussion at Clarence House?" Catherine and William exchanged a glance, and while neither was particularly eager to extend an already difficult evening, they recognized the wisdom in Charles's suggestion. Allowing the situation to fester overnight would likely make it more difficult to resolve. "Of course," William replied for both of them. "I think that would be helpful." The car ride to Clarence House was notably quiet, with each couple traveling separately and using the time to decompress and prepare for what was sure to be a challenging conversation. Catherine finally allowed herself to drop some of the professional facade she had maintained throughout the evening, and William could see the exhaustion and hurt that she had been carefully concealing. "I know it wasn't intentional," Catherine said quietly, "but it still feels quite personal. That necklace has been part of some very important moments for me." William reached over and squeezed her hand supportively. "Your feelings are completely valid," he assured her, "and I'm confident that Charles will want to make this right." In the other car, Charles and Camilla were having their own difficult conversation. Camilla was clearly distressed about the situation and how it had unfolded, feeling responsible despite not having intended any slight toward Catherine. "I feel terrible about this, Charles," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I would never want Catherine to feel that I was deliberately trying to take something that was important to her." "I know you wouldn't," Charles replied gently. "This appears to be a failure in our administrative systems rather than any intentional action. But we do need to address it properly and ensure it doesn't happen again." When both couples arrived at Clarence's house, they gathered in Charles's private study, a space that felt more intimate and appropriate for a family conversation than the formal reception rooms. The staff had been dismissed for the evening, ensuring complete privacy for what was sure to be a sensitive discussion. Charles began by acknowledging the situation directly and taking responsibility for the oversight. "First, I want to apologize to all of you for what happened this evening. This kind of confusion should not have occurred, and I take full responsibility for the failure in our systems." Catherine appreciated the directness of his approach. "Thank you, Charles. I know these things happen, but I won't pretend it wasn't difficult." Camilla immediately turned to Catherine, her distress evident in her expression. "Catherine, I am so sorry. I had absolutely no idea that there was any conflict with the jewelry selection. If I had known, I would never have." "I believe you," Catherine interrupted gently, her natural kindness overriding her hurt feelings. "I know you wouldn't have done this intentionally." The acknowledgement seemed to provide some relief to all parties, but Charles knew that apologies alone wouldn't be sufficient to prevent similar situations in the future or to fully address the underlying issues that had allowed this to happen. "We need to review our entire jewelry coordination system," Charles continued. "Mrs. Harrison has been doing excellent work, but clearly there are gaps in communication between the different households that need to be addressed." William nodded in agreement. "It might be helpful to have a more centralized system for tracking requests and avoiding conflicts, especially for pieces that have particular significance or recent history." As they discussed the administrative improvements that needed to be made, the conversation gradually became less tense and more collaborative. All four family members shared the goal of preventing similar situations in the future, and they began working together to identify practical solutions. Camilla raised an important point about the complexity of the royal jewelry collection and the challenge of managing pieces that might hold different meanings for different family members. "Perhaps we need better documentation about which pieces have particular significance or associations," she suggested. "That's a very good point," Catherine agreed. "Some pieces do become quite personal over time, even though they're technically part of the larger collection." Charles appreciated seeing his wife and daughter-in-law working together constructively to address the situation. Despite the evening's difficulties, their fundamental respect and care for each other was evident in how they approached the problem-solving discussion. As the conversation continued, they also addressed the immediate question of how to handle any media attention or public speculation that might arise from the evening. Royal fashion choices were always scrutinized closely, and there's a possibility that observant royal watchers might notice and comment on the jewelry situation. "I think the best approach is simply to handle any questions with discretion and not draw additional attention to the matter," William suggested. "If anyone asks directly, we can simply say it was an administrative oversight that has been resolved." The others agreed with this approach, recognizing that making a bigger issue of the situation publicly would only create more problems and speculation. The goal was to resolve the matter privately and move forward constructively. By the end of their conversation, which lasted nearly an hour, all four family members felt that they had addressed the immediate issues and established a path forward. The evening had been challenging, but their ability to discuss the situation openly and work together toward solutions had actually strengthened their relationships in some ways. As Catherine and William prepared to leave for Kensington Palace, there was a sense of relief and renewed understanding among all parties. The jewelry situation had been an unfortunate oversight, but their response to it had demonstrated their commitment to family harmony and effective communication.